intentionally drugged food, a stunt double being paralyzed, and a spy parody classic that hired a to-be murderer. These are just a few of some of the dark and quite frankly shocking events that happen behind the scenes of your favourite movies. And so in this video we're doing a deep dive into your nostalgia, picking apart and destroying it from the inside out. I'll be giving you a list of the most dark and shocking events that happened behind the scenes of your favourite movies growing up. Some of them you might have heard of, but I will guarantee there'll be a few that you have not. I've scoured the internet, so here we go, let's get into things. We're going to start off with some more well-known events, and as we get further into the video, the events are going to get a little bit more niche or unknown about, so stay tuned for that. Things are only going to get more obscure from here. So the first one we have is what I started the video with, intentionally tainted food. I want to talk about how someone spiked the entire cast and crew of the Titanic movie with PCP. If you don't know what PCP is, it is a hallucinogenic drug also known as angel dust. It has a wide range of effects, but in high enough doses can actually result in seizures and death. It was 1996 and the Titanic cast and crew were in high spirits, finishing filming on their smaller Nova Scotia set, being about to move to a larger set down in Mexico. Everyone was on their lunch break as the catering crew brought in a massive array of food topped off with clam chowder. That was the main event, this big pot of clam chowder that everyone could have a bit if they wanted to. Now, I wasn't here for this clam chowder, but sources say that this was the most delicious, beautiful clam chowder that has ever been made. It was absolutely delicious, so people came in for seconds and even thirds. However, this would be one of the biggest mistakes of their lives. A short while later, director James Cameron said that he felt woozy, and as he looked around the set, some people were laughing, okay, fair enough, but some people were crying, and some people were vomiting. There was even a conga line. It was madness. The crew had been spiked, and to this day, no one actually knows who did it. Now, no one was seriously harmed, thank God, but there was a list of suspects on who did it. Firstly, James Cameron actually suspected his wife. They weren't dating at the time, but they would eventually go on to get married, and his wife did not have any of the clam chowder, so he's always said that she is high up on his suspicions list. That might just be a joke though, of course it might be. However, the day before the spiking, apparently someone had been fired for interfering with the catering team. Apparently they had a bit of a problem with the catering team, so this could definitely be their way of getting revenge on the cast and crew for being fired. The person's name has never been revealed and they were never charged in relation to the spiking. There just wasn't enough evidence, so this is currently an unsolved mystery. The Snow Buddies died. This is a real not good one to get to so early in the video, but it is kind of well talked about, even though it is extremely sad. So back in the mid to late 2000s, Disney created a spin-off of films from its famous Air Bud sports comedy. And yeah, I mean, looking back, these movies were complete trash. They'd have no rewatch value now that I'm an adult, but when I was a kid, these films were great. Everyone loves Golden Retriever pups. It's just fun to watch them walk around for a bit. Well, in a horribly dark twist of fate, there was an outbreak of something called canine parvovirus on set, with many of the other dogs being later diagnosed with Giardia and Coccidia. These are diseases common in young pups, but this did lead to the death of 5 puppies, with a further 30 being removed from the set. Now, to my understanding, puppies being used in filmmaking are meant to be at least 14 weeks old. This was not the case for the dogs in the Snow Buddies movie. People estimate that the puppies in this movie were actually as young as 6 weeks old, so they were using underage puppies in their movie. But the breeders actually turned around and sued Disney because they said that their reputation had been hurt by the ordeal. The Snow Buddies movie went on to make $50 million, and the only thing I can say is, was it worth it? Was 5 puppies' lives worth $50 million in DVD sales? It really does put a damper on a childhood favourite of mine, and I'm sure many others. On a bit of a brighter note, Jim Carrey's How the Grinch Stole Christmas is regarded as a holiday classic. People from all over the world watch this movie every year, and it is just hilarious. I love it. And while this is one of the more documented events I have on this list, I thought I would bring it up just in case you do not know it. So, I mean, one of the best things about the film is the Grinch himself, right? The suit they put the Grinch in is absolutely unbelievable. Jim Carrey is able to effortlessly emote and act what he said was like being buried alive under all of that makeup. And to be honest, it looks like it too. Look how much makeup he has on. The film would have been so much worse if his suit was CGI'd in, so I'm so glad that they got him to act and emote through the makeup, but wow, this was hard to film. At the start of the film's shoot, it was noted that he was extremely callous to his makeup artist, who eventually took a temporary leave of absence due to the abuse that he received from Carey. The actor would often run away from set and come back and have his makeup be completely ruined and torn off. After 2 weeks of filming, the movie only actually recorded 3 days worth of content, so they were terribly behind schedule. The production company even had to bring in a CIA operative who had been trained in teaching Carey torture resistance. To Carey, this was actually torture, and I'm sure to anyone else to do this for as long as he had to would have been torture. Carey claims that the makeup took 8.5 hours to put on each day, but some of the producers said that that was closer to only 2.5 hours. Still, 2.5 hours every single day, it's a lot of time. Even still, for 92 days, Jim Carrey endured the pain, and he went on to deliver one of his fine classic performances that we all know him for today. The Wizard of Oz. I really could not do this video without talking about the atrocities that happen behind the scenes of The Wizard of Oz, and I'm sure a few of you have heard of it, but again, in case you haven't, I'm going to do a little speed run because there are so many things here that you might have heard of 2, 3, 4 of them, but you haven't heard of the rest, so let's get into the speed run now. Buddy Ebsen, who played the Tin Man, went to hospital because his makeup gave him a violent allergic reaction to the aluminum that it was made out of. He had respiratory problems after only 9 days of filming. Judy Garland got slapped across the face by director Victor Fleming for laughing too hard during a scene. He told her to go and get to work. Garland got the scene perfect in the next take, but apparently Fleming felt bad afterwards, and although Garland felt no ill will, this was completely unacceptable. The Munchkins joined the film to avoid the Nazis, but when on film, according to Judy Garland's ex-husband, these men, who were in their mid-40s mind you, molested Judy Garland, putting their hands up her dress. Keep in mind that Judy Garland would have been only 16 at the time. The actress who played the Wicked Witch of the West received 2nd and 3rd degree burns after the copper makeup she was wearing got too hot during the fire scene. Just to round out problems with the makeup, the actor for the Scarecrow, Ray Bolger, was left with scars that took over a year to heal after filming because his makeup embedded marks within his skin. The resources they had at the time were not of the same level that we have today. Finally, I believe I've mentioned this before in a previous video, but many people believe that the cause of Judy Garland's success would also be the cause of her demise, because Dorothy was meant to be a child and Judy Garland was not. For this reason, she was stuffed into a tight corset and prescribed drugs to help her keep her weight down, as well as sleep after 16-hour workdays. Judy Garland would foray into drug use all of her life and eventually die of a barbiturate overdose. It has to be one of the most well-documented behind-the-scenes disasters. This is a wonderful movie, but the pain and the toll that all of the actors, especially Judy Garland, would have gone through is awful. It's absolutely awful. Gone with the Wind is the highest grossing film of all time when you adjust for inflation. Now, if you think that Endgame made a lot of money, this movie made 1 billion more at the box office when adjusted for inflation. Fun fact, it was also directed by Victor Fleming, director of Wizard of Oz. The movie itself came out in 1939, so they worked very quickly after the release of the book. However, there's one small fact that I've just missed out. The greatest source of contention with the original book for Gone with the Wind was the script, because when Margaret Mitchell wrote it, she wrote in a lot of the N-word. She dropped a lot of N-bombs, 65 to be precise. She put 65 N-bombs in there, which definitely was a source of contention throughout pre-production of the movie. Now, the runtime of Gone with the Wind is about 4 hours, which is absolutely huge. I'm sure if you've seen the film before, you will know this thing is like an entire lifetime. But even with that, that is 1 N-bomb every 4 minutes on average. Now, the film is set at the time of the Civil War, and so the film's producer, David Selznick, got into contact with the head of the NAACP at the time, Walter White. And no, I don't mean the guy from Breaking Bad, it's this guy instead. Walter White wanted Selznick to hire an African-American advisor to be on the set to try and more accurately portray the historical matters. Eventually, Selznick decided to take the words out of the script, and many believe that this is why the film is so watched today. Even 80 years later, people will go and watch this film every single year. It's a complete classic. My phone's just gone off. But yeah, they decided not to include the N-word, and to be honest, probably for the best. Shining is considered by many to be one of the greatest films Stanley Kubrick ever created, maybe his greatest piece of art. From the cinematography to the performances, to the sound design, to the editing, to the set design, it's all an entrancing masterpiece. But I want to head back for a second and talk about the performances. I want to talk about Shelley Duvall and what Stanley Kubrick did to get the absolute highest cream of the crop performance out of her, because her acting in this film is absolutely phenomenal, and there is a reason why. So many people have praised Shelley Duvall over the years for her fantastic portrayal as Wendy Torrance in the 1980s psychological horror, but not so many people know that she was practically tormented on set by director Stanley Kubrick, so much that she actually considered quitting acting. So Stanley Kubrick wanted to instill the fear of God within Duvall to help her with her performance, so he gave her impossibly hard requests on set. The baseball bat scene, for example, took 127 takes to get right, and if you've seen her reaction in the shot, she had to match that 126 other times. This was actually a world record too. Her throat became hoarse, her hands became wounded, and throughout filming, things got so stressful for her that she actually began losing small amounts of hair. She was isolated on set. She had her lines cut unexpectedly. Kubrick told the entire crew to ignore her, never praising her performance. All the while, Kubrick would act one way with the rest of the cast and crew, and according to Jack Nicholson, he became a new director every time he was talking to Duvall. This was one of the hardest acting jobs ever put to screen. During her duration on set, Shelley Duvall's life was a living, walking nightmare. So this is something I talked about in a previous video. For the life of me, I can't exactly remember which one. I have a sneaking suspicion that it was either the cancelled films iceberg or maybe it was the DreamWorks iceberg. I'm not 100% sure. Probably one of those two though. So Shrek is a childhood classic for basically everyone I know. I don't know anyone that does not like the Shrek movies, or at least 1 and 2. They're fantastic. They're great critiques of the fairy tale genre, and also sticking one to Disney, who had absolute dominion of the animation market in the 90s. So this was a really big deal at the time, and it still is. So many people know and love this film, but not so many know that whilst Mike Myers was the voice of Shrek, he was the one that we all know and love today, he was not the original voice chosen for the project. He actually joined it quite late because Chris Farley had passed away very shortly before the film was finished. He was near to completing his lines when he passed away in late 1997 due to a drug overdose, and the studio went into panic mode. And a little known fact here that you might not know is that the character of Shrek was actually written with Farley in mind. His and Donkey's relationship was moulded off Chris Farley and David Spade's relationship prior to the former passing. The studio even went as far as recasting the role of Fiona from Janeane Garofalo, who you might know better from voicing Colette in Ratatouille. They changed the role from her to Cameron Diaz, who you might be a little bit more familiar with, and this was due to Janeane Garofalo's relationship with Farley and out of respect to him. They had to redesign basically everything. They had to rewrite the script, they had to change voice actors and actresses for a lot of the main roles. It was a bit of a nightmare. By no means is this the darkest entry we have on the list, but a successful young man killed in his early 30s in a very preventable way is definitely very sad. But the film would later be released and become the smash hit that we know of it today. So a lot of people know that behind the scenes of The Wizard of Oz was very problematic and, to be honest, kind of cursed. There's a lot of stuff there that would not fly today, and it should not have flown back then. But not so many people talk about behind the scenes of the Passion of the Christ and the absolute torture that actor Jim Caviezel had to go through to become Jesus Christ. Because let me tell you now, if there has ever been someone who went method, it is this guy. This guy went through absolute torture to give one of the great film performances many people think. So yet again, here is another little speed run of what happened behind the scenes of the Passion of the Christ. Specifically what happened to Jim Caviezel, but also a few other things that happened that weren't so great. So here we go. Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus, was struck by lightning. The odds of this happening to a person are 0.008. He hit the unlucky jackpot right to begin with. However, he would be outdone by the assistant director Jim Michelini, who was struck by lightning not once but actually twice. Once with Jim Caviezel and once by himself. He was given the nickname Lightning Boy because of it. Back to our lead actor Jim Caviezel though, because he was actually whipped during the making of the movie and had a 14-inch gash on his back due to the injury. To add to his misery, he also got hypothermia on set, which led to pneumonia and a lung infection. According to the actor, the set was extremely cold, which made it hard to act and also made him quite weak. Apparently, according to him as well, no one on set cared. They all just wanted to see how far this would go and if it would help his performance. On top of this, to add to his list of massive injuries. He once dislocated his shoulder carrying the cross, which weighed 150 pounds. The actor wanted to portray Jesus' suffering as accurately as possible, so he was okay to go through with all of these injuries. Hats off to the man, but oh wow, this man went through the absolute thick of it to deliver the performance of his career. And I want to follow that through to our next subject. I want to talk about James Cagney, and he's an actor that you might not be aware of if you're born today, but if you were born back in like the 1910s or 20s or even 30s, you would have definitely heard of this guy because he was absolutely everywhere at the time. And let me tell you right now, James Cagney had balls of steels. This man had some real stones on him. So he's a very old school actor, being born in 1899 and dying in 1986, but whether or not the general public of today have heard of him, back in the 30s, this dude was all over the place. Orson Welles, best known for directing Citizen Kane, is even quoted as saying that he is perhaps the greatest actor who has ever appeared in front of a camera. Now, James Cagney is remembered for his multi-faced tough characters being huge in early gangster films, but back in the 1930s, we didn't have the movie magic that we had today. And so in some instances, such as in 1931's Public Enemy, an absolute classic by the way, if a character was to be shot at, or in this instance if James Cagney was to be shot at, they did not use fake bullets. They could have used blank, but apparently this was, I guess, more expensive. These people actually shot live ammunition at James Cagney. They actually shot live ammunition at their lead actor. They missed him by mere inches. The skin of his teeth, he survived that. And eventually, later on in his career, he actually got to say, no, don't shoot at me with live ammo. This dude, as I said before, had absolute stones. Old Hollywood was mental. The Back to the Future 2 near fatal mistake. So when I was researching this one, I thought it was very one note until I actually found out what happened afterwards. So I'm going to combine two stories into one here and give them to you right now. So Back to the Future 2 contains the memorable hoverboard chase scene. It's one of the best scenes of the movie. I think it's my favorite. Everyone remembers and loves it, right? Well, there might be a few members of the cast and crew who remember it for all of the wrong reasons, because this scene went extremely badly and it injured one of the stunt performers, Cheryl Wheeler. Now, I could go into extreme details of what happened from a production standpoint here, but instead I can show you how it was meant to go, because the scene actually made it into the movie. If you notice carefully, these two guys here made it through the glass window, and this woman here did not. This was not supposed to happen, and while it cuts, what actually happened afterwards was that the stunt woman Cheryl Wheeler fell 30 feet, breaking bones in her face, arm, and hand. She survived the incident, but was injured because of it, and she actually died back in 2020 after a shootout with her ex-husband. I believe that her and her current husband went to confront her ex-husband about college tuition issues with their daughter, and her husband started opening fire on her ex, and her ex-husband killed her husband, and then she came in and then he killed her as well. The husband was let off with it because apparently it was self-defense. This was a very shocking twist to enter the story. I did not expect to see this when I was researching her. Absolutely just shocking, to say the least. From one Back to the Future story to another, now I want to talk about Back to the Future 3, because something near fatal almost happened again. I don't know who was doing the health and safety precautions on set, who was ticking off lists and stuff, but they did not do a good enough job, because Michael J. Fox almost died on set. So this is not so extreme, but long story short, there was a small stunt where Fox's character Marty had a noose around his neck, and in one take, since his whole body wasn't meant to be shown, they let him stand on a box, but the director Robert Zemeckis did not like that, so they took the box away. They did the take over and over and over again, as you do with films, but on the 7th take something went wrong. Michael J. Fox started to get tired, and he didn't correctly calculate where his hand was supposed to go between the noose and his neck. Michael J. Fox would then end up passing out for at least 30 seconds. The reason why this happened was the noose was too tight around his neck for a full 30 seconds. He was actually being hung live on set, and it took everyone nearly a minute to figure out that he was actually being hung, that he couldn't breathe. He was okay in the end, but this was yet another problem that they faced behind the scenes of Back to the Future. The stunt performed in my next subject would not have such a happy ending. This actually happened behind the scenes of Harry Potter. This is the story of how David Holmes' stunt double for Daniel Radcliffe became paralyzed in 2009. So as I said, it was 2009 and Warner Brothers was shooting Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. There was an intended explosion, but when it went off, David Holmes went plummeting to the ground. He was rehearsing a fly-in sequence with a harness, with a planned blast which was supposed to send Holmes jerking back, but it went badly wrong and he slammed into a wall. He immediately started screaming, "I can't feel my legs," to everyone's horror. He was rushed to hospital, but there was nothing substantially that could be done, and he was left paralysed from the chest down, according to the Mirror, with only limited movement in his arms and hands. Because of this, Daniel Radcliffe hosted a charity auction to try and raise funds for David Holmes' hospital bills, and at least if there was a small upside of this, he's remained very close with the cast. He has spent the last 11 years adjusting to his new life, and in 2020 he actually created a podcast with Daniel Radcliffe called Cunning Stunts, where each week they talk to fellow stuntmen and talk about the dangers of the job. So I'm not too much of a fan of old superhero movies, so I really don't know how many people will know this. Let me know down in the comments if you knew this before, but apparently actor Jack O'Halloran and Christopher Reeve had massive behind the scenes beef, and it almost ended up in Christopher Reeve getting assaulted. He almost got punched. This happened behind the scenes of Superman 2, and long story short, these two men hated each other. Even though it seems like O'Halloran hates Christopher Reeve just a little bit more, because even after the Superman actor has passed away, O'Halloran has spared no expense chatting a little bit of shit about him. Now, Jack O'Halloran claims that reports of the fight the two had have been blown out of proportion. However, this doesn't excuse the fact that during the filming of the second Superman film, O'Halloran confronted Reeves, who had allegedly spoken about him in poor taste to the owner of a restaurant that O'Halloran was friends with. Now, Jack O'Halloran was a boxer midweek, and so he threw Christopher Reeve up against the wall, and he was about to hit him right before the director got things separated. Not too dark by any means, but I thought I would mention it because there are a bunch of stories like this where actors get into fights or beef backstage, but very few get into fights with actual boxers, so things could have got really bad for Christopher Reeve there. Singin' in the Rain has got to go down as potentially the greatest musical from the golden age of Hollywood. From the singing to the acting, this film will go down in history, but not so many people ever talk about the choreography in this film because it was actually more intense than you would realize. In the song number for Good Morning, you'll notice that there aren't many cuts like there might be today for such a number. And while these long takes are more impressive in my opinion, it also means that the dancing is more intense because you've got to do more of it. You can't just get away with a few moves here and there. You have to learn choreographed scenes and sequences. So much that the actress over here, Debbie Reynolds, who plays Kathy Selden in the smash hit, had her feet bleeding by the end of it. Her feet were bleeding because of the dancing. According to her first-hand account, actor Gene Kelly at the end of takes would say, "Clean it up." So it wasn't just at the very end her feet started bleeding, no, she had to dance with them like this. She was forced to dance with her feet bleeding likely for hours and hours, take after take in severe pain, and have to put on a smile on her face because it's now the morning and she's really hyped about that. She couldn't actually walk after this, she had to have assistants carry her to her trailer, and then the doctor came in and said that she was on bed rest for the next 2 days, so they couldn't shoot anything for the next 2 days after shooting this sequence because she was so badly injured. Not overly dark, but there is something a bit off about having to dance for hours and hours and hours with a Hollywood smile on your face the entire time. It must have been very, very awful to shoot that, but the next 3 entries I have are like the big bads. These 3 next entries are awful, awful, awful things that happen behind the scenes. So I'm going to put a little disclaimer here. Do not watch any further if you don't think you can handle it, because these next 3 are quite bad. So of all the topics I have covered today, and maybe even this year, this next entry is one of, if not the saddest and the most tragic of them all. It's not a secret, it's been reported for years and years, but I will bring it up because it is an absolute travesty what happened behind the scenes. This is the murder of Judith Barsi, best known for her role as Ducky in the 1988 action-adventure animated film The Land Before Time. She appeared in various other roles such as Fatal Vision, Jaws the Revenge, and All Dogs Go to Heaven, which would be her final film. But The Land Before Time is generally considered what she's best known for. She was a child actress, and one that found success quite early for that, earning an estimated $100,000 a year by the 4th grade. However, her success came at the anger of her father, Joseph Barsi, an alcoholic who became increasingly angry and threatened to kill himself as well as his wife and daughter. He was an abusive husband and father, and while Judith Barsi's mother intended to divorce him, she never got the chance because in late July 1988, Joseph murdered his family, burning their bodies and committing suicide. with the police being alerted after a neighbour heard the sound of a gunshot. The Land Before Time, as well as her final role in All Dogs Go to Heaven, would be released posthumously and would be dedicated in her memory. I really don't have much more to say. What happened to her was an absolute travesty, and I believe I will move on to the final few entries now. So you would think that more messed up things might happen behind the scenes of horror films just because they are horror films, and at least what you see on screen is actually a very different experience to what it would be like shooting them. Very rarely are sets of horror films, just like any film, actually very dark and not a good place to be and scary. Well, this isn't exactly the case for The Exorcist. This is because the movie actually hired a man who would go on to become a serial killer. The man in question played the role of the radiologist in the 1973 classic. Paul Bateson was his name. At the time, at least to my knowledge, he had not conducted any of his murders. However, within only 2 years, he would go on a killing spree known as the Bag Murders in Manhattan, USA, in which he would go on to murder at least 6 gay men, dismembering them and throwing their remains into the Hudson River, although he has never admitted to it. He was caught after the murder of Addison Verrill, who was a reporter for Variety. Verrill was found dead in his apartment with nothing of value being stolen. The police were able to crack the case, however, and Bateson was sentenced to 20 years to life, being released on parole after 24 years and 3 months, and released from his parole 5 years after that. It's actually unknown if he is still alive today. Being born in 1940, he would be at least 81 now. There was a man who died in Pennsylvania in 2012 with the exact same name and birthday as him, but it is unknown if these two are the same person. The director of the Exorcist movies stated in 2018 that he believed that he was somewhere in upstate New York, but generally did not know where he was. Austin Powers is one of the great spy parodies of all time. I'm always between this one and Johnny English as to which one's my favourite. I love them both, they are fantastic films. But did you know that the actor who played Random Task in Austin Powers is actually in prison, and the reason why will shock you. So Random Task was a smallish role. Not insignificant, but generally he's a bit of a goon. He comes in to ambush Austin Powers, being used as a good side character to Dr. Evil, but his actor Joe Sun, born in 1970, was actually convicted in 2008 for a whole slew of things. This dude has basically done every crime in the book. So he was in prison for felony vandalism for 60 days and was given a further 90 days for violating his probation. Due to this, he had to give a DNA sample. And this is where it goes from bad to worse for Joe Sun, because this linked him into a gang rape committed on Christmas Eve 1990. So this would have happened many years before he appeared on Austin Powers. He should have been in prison, but was never caught. The charges were dropped in 2011 for exceeding the statute of limitations, but Sun was then charged with conspiracy to commit murder and torture, crimes which have no statute of limitations. In late August, Sun was found guilty of 1 felony count of torture and was sentenced to 7 years to life, so Sun went to prison. However, 1 month later, at 5:25 PM on the 10th of October 2011, he goes and kills his cellmate, beating him to death. At his trial in 2017, he was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter and received a 27-year sentence. So provided he does not kill anyone else, he will be released in 2044 at the age of 73. What an absolute scumbag. So there we have it, that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please do hit the red subscribe button. Hit that big red button right now, go do it, because I know you enjoyed. We're building this community from the ground up, and it would be great to have you alongside. I have a Twitter and an Instagram that you can go and follow. I have a Discord that you can also join, and I have a Patreon that you can help support. Links for all of these will be in the description. I really hope that you check some of them out. Speaking of patrons, here's the list up here. Thank you guys so much. You helped me do all of this, and I am truly appreciative. Better late than never, but please, a massive shout out for Sustained Disgust, who actually did the iceberg for my last video. I completely forgot to credit him then, so thank you so much, mate. Thank you. Aside from that, please let me know down in the comments what you'd like to see me do next, because I'm only 101 videos in, and I'm already out of ideas. Thank you for watching.